Yeah.
Hi, I'm DJ Lippy. Welcome to the inaugural broadcast of Wounds with a View. It's going to be a bit more lighthearted than some of your turfy YouTube programs. We're going to just basically, it's like having a Zoom conversation. I think during lockdown, we've all got used to this sort of way of communicating. And yeah, we're going to basically go around and talk about a topic of the week that's interested us. But first, I'm just going to go around and everybody can introduce themselves. So, Iris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Iris. I'm a mother, grandmother, adult human female.
Birdie?
I'm the famous artist Birdie Rose. I'm an artist.
Fantastic. Chinzia?
My name is Chinzia and I love J.K. Rowling. I love her. Biggest fan. I'm the biggest fan.
Naomi?
I'm Naomi. I'm part of Make More Noise. I run it with DJ Lippy. And I have a suffragette t-shirt on as well. I don't know if you can see it. There we go.
And nice. Lastly, Naomi's leastly, we have Dansky from the WHRC.
Hi, my name is Kara Dansky. I live in Washington, D.C., and I work with the Women's Human Rights Campaign at both the international levels and in the U.S.
Fantastic. Kara, would you like to kick things off today and tell us what your story of the week is?
Sure. So my story of the week, it has to do with the NCAA, the U.S.-based National Collegiate Athletic Association. This is the most prominent, most important, most popular athletic association for collegiate athletics in America. It involves almost all university athletic programs across the country. There's only one other athletic association for collegiate athletics. It's much smaller. So the NCAA is a really big deal here. And for several years, the NCAA has had a policy of allowing males to compete in female-only athletics if they have been on testosterone suppression drugs for 1 year. That's its policy, and that is still its policy. And it recently came out with a statement affirming that that is its policy. But the reason it made news recently is that several U.S. states are considering legislation to protect women-only sports at either the high school level or the college level or both. So there are something like 50 bills in about 30 or so states. Some of them have passed. We're waiting for some of the other ones to make their way through the legislature. And we're really excited about this development. It's a great development for women's sports. And the reason the NCAA made the news recently is that in its statement affirming its policy of allowing men to compete in women's collegiate athletics if they have been on testosterone suppressing drugs for 1 year, is that now they have kind of vaguely hinted that they will boycott any state that has in place a law to protect women's sports. Now, the thing about it is the ACLU, which has become a huge enemy to women and girls in the US, very quickly jumped on it and proclaimed that this is a victory for them, that the NCAA is going to ban, or I'm sorry, the NCAA is going to boycott states that ban trans athletes from sports, which of course none of these bills actually ban anyone from sports. That's completely misleading. But anyway, the ACLU claimed this as a victory. But the truth is the NCAA statement is really quite vaguely worded. It says that it's going to be very careful to examine any state or other jurisdiction where it's considering holding an event to determine whether they think the state sort of measures up to its standards on preventing discrimination. And it has some language that, you know, most of us would consider to be a dog whistle or a red flag. Like, you know, they want to make sure they're inclusive spaces. We all know what that means. And so we're going to be monitoring it. But I think on the whole, it's really bad news for women and girls, but also it's not quite as bad news as the ACLU would like it to be for women and girls. So that's my news item of the week.
Oh, that's
good. Crazy.
Yeah. I was a bit worried, but the way you're explaining it, it sounds much better.
Yeah.
It's bad. Don't get me wrong, it's bad, and we don't think it's going to go well for women and girls. It's just not quite as bad as the ACLU wants it to be, because it serves their purpose to claim this as a victory, right? And I'm not quite persuaded that it's as much of a victory as they want to claim that it is.
So who's boycotting who?
Well, it's the NCAA claiming that they're going to, they don't use the word boycott, but they say they're going to avoid states. They're not going to hold events in states that do not provide, inclusive and safe environments for everyone. And so we know what that means. It's bad.
So that's a bigger form of cancelling. Yeah.
And, the real concern here is a handful of states have passed laws that will protect women's sports. They're very good laws, but most haven't yet. They're still making their way through the legislatures. We have, I think, 2 states where state legislatures have passed bills to protect women's sports, and we're waiting for the governors to sign. And in some ways, it's kind of a scare tactic. It's a scare tactic to say, hey, state legislators, don't protect women's sports because we're coming after you. Or, hey, governors, don't sign these bills because we're coming after you.
It's so manipulative and insidious the way this has been portrayed. Yeah. When people say, oh, trans people are being excluded from sports, like you said, they've never been excluded. They're welcome to participate in the sector that they belong to.
Yep.
This is not an exercise in gaining freedoms for anybody.
It's very misleading. It's so misleading. And, the ACLU, of course, drives this narrative, but our media is no better. Our media always talks about this in their headlines as bills to ban trans athletes. That's just not what's happening.
The reason they put that headline on it is to get the clicks, though, isn't it? Because the journalists are living on that at the moment. So, of course, the media is going to go down that route.
Sure.
Yeah.
Why are they grifting?
Our media has been completely captured by this, as I know yours has to a lesser extent. Yeah. You're able to get, some feminist arguments presented in your media, which is great. We can't get any at all, unless, as many of you know, unless we take to conservative media, which gets us in a bit of trouble.
Well, it allows the sorry, Chinzia, I'll come to you. As like the right wing, this is a right wing agenda, and this is the right wing issue. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the left won't cover it, so then the right cover it, so then it's easy to dismiss and go, oh, look, it's another Fox News segment against the trans scare, and it's a very misleading way to frame women's concerns. I feel like it's frustrating enough for us in this country, but it must be doubly so in America.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. It's awful. And, sometimes, we'll hear people who are on the political right say, where are the feminists? Where are the leftist feminists? Why aren't they speaking up? And we're all like, hello, here we are.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chinzia,
all right.
I read that
statement. Is it really workable for them to ban all these states? If there are more and more coming on board banning DT, is it really difficult for them to avoid doing events in all these states?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was thinking about it today. We are not optimistic enough to hope that we will get 50 states protecting women's sports. That's just not realistic. We're not going to get there. But theoretically, what if we did? If we got 50 states protecting women's sports, the NCAA cannot boycott all 50 states. They just can't.
Exactly.
Or another thing that could happen is the states that do protect women's sports will have all the athletes going there. Like the female athletes, I mean, they will go to the states where their right to compete fairly will be protected, and then the other states will be lacking in female athletes, won't they? So especially like high school girls that want to go to college and do sports, they're going to find a college that will protect them and their right to compete fairly.
Yeah, but there are also huge financial consequences that come with the NCAA boycotting a state. The NCAA has a massive amount of money, and if the NCAA chooses to boycott a state, that could potentially have financial repercussions for that state. Now, maybe it wouldn't, you know, it may not, but a lot of this is unknown, but it could potentially. So we'll see. That's a good point too, Birdie. But I points really well taken. You know, if we get even 10, 15, 20 states that protect women's sports, is it realistic to think that the NCAA won't hold any events in those states? It may not be.
Yeah. Yes. What did you say?
I read their statement online, and how fair they are, and the evolving. It's an evolving. The testosterone. The studies are evolving, and I just thought, why are you lying? Why are you?
I saw that as well.
I don't understand why it's such a blatant lie. Why would you do that to girls? Why?
Yeah. I mean, all of this is a lie. We know that. All of it.
It's not evolving, is it? It's just a big fat fib. It's not evolving at all.
Right.
No. That's how they operate, though. They put in that little seed of a lie.
Well, what is the quote, isn't it? If you're gonna lie, pick a big one and just like say it often. Be confident, and that's what they've done, isn't it? They've just sort of said sex differences don't exist. Gender's important. Sex is a social construct. It sounds crazy to have conversations because people think we're crazy, but that's really what's being said at all these organisations. It's been captured to just say absolute nonsense that everybody knows is not true, but they've sort of
Well,
back to the media as well. You know, there are scientists here. You know, Colin Wright comes to mind. He's an evolutionary biologist. He's very much on our side, but he can't get any voice in the media any better than I can. And he and I have talked about this. You know, he's a guy, so he doesn't claim to be a feminist, but he's an evolutionary biologist who knows about sex differences. And he would be happy. He would be absolutely happy to go in the media and talk about it and defend bills to protect women's sports. I can't speak for him, but I assume he'd be happy to do that. But he can't get a voice in the media any more than I or any other feminist can.
I don't know any other human rights or human rights movement that has got this sort of power. I've never heard of it. I've never heard of anything like this before. And, you know, like you said, the repeating of lies, the repeating of the idea that this is the most oppressed minority there's ever been. But they've got all this power to shut up the scientists. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of money behind it. And the lies are blatant. And, you know, I really have been thinking more and more along the lines that everybody in society has been gaslit, right? Everybody in society has been lied to. And my liberal communities, my lefty friends, you know, they just assume because they've been lied to that there's some kind of science behind the trans thing. They assume that they need to take a position of, you know, protecting a marginalized minority because that's sort of the go-to for someone who comes from a liberal or a leftist background. And peeling the lies away is just really, really hard. It can be done. I've done it with several of my friends, but it's hard to do on a mass scale. And we've got a lot of people in this country.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. I've had it with individual friends, and I think most of my friends are on board now. But it's not always an easy conversation. Sometimes it takes several attempts and a lot of patience, a lot of different avenues to go into, to break down the obvious. And I feel like it's something that's very much, the more education that you have, the more likely you are to fall for it. I think, you know, very, very easy for me to convince like my hairdresser mates that, you know, men aren't women. But if you've got a degree, then you've kind of been brainwashed a little bit. It's a really interesting phenomenon. I know for myself, it took me quite a lot of research to figure out that women don't have penises, which is ridiculous considering I spent all this money on my Goldsmiths education. But maybe that explains why it took me so long to figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do about this, Birdie, or anything that the listeners can do? Are there any resources out there, or what can they do to stop this move, or to at least sort of show their disapproval or their opposition to it?
To the NCAA?
Yeah.
Well, so, you know, I mentioned I work with the Women's Human Rights Campaign. So the Women's Human Rights Campaign promotes something called the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. Anyone can find it at womensdeclaration.com. Anyone, anywhere in the world can sign it. It has 16,000 signatures. And so please check it out, womensdeclaration.com. With respect to this particular issue, Article 7 of the Declaration is the article that specifically addresses women's sports. And it specifically says that women and girls have the right to compete with and against each other exclusively from males. And so it's Article 7 of the Women's Declaration, womensdeclaration.com. Please do check it out and sign it if you can.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, that was an interesting one. I think, thank you for coming, Karma, and talking with us and explaining a little bit about this. I think we all get a bit confused when it comes to the US politics and all the different state legislatures. And I feel like, I don't know about you, women, a lot of the time I'm just like...
Don't worry, so do we.
Okay, Chinzia, what are you going to talk about this week?
Well, J.K. Rowling hit the newsstands last night. So late last night, it was. I'm going to go with the Times. With her name is, or his name is Aoife, or her name Aoife. She wrote for the Times last night. So we've got J.K. Rowling has been vindicated by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. So the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland have stuck up for J.K. Rowling. It was a show broadcast last September, and it was Matt Hooper's radio show, the Today FM, I think it was, on Matt Hooper, and one of the panelists called her a transphobic bigot. And we've got the Rowling resistance, and an anonymous complainant has put a complaint through, and they've upheld it. And basically, they told the regulator has told them to ease up. That's bang out of order. And I'm sure J.K. Rowling's pretty chuffed. I'm very happy for her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the first time. It was the first time that the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland had done upheld a complaint in about 3 years. So that's it's unusual for them to uphold a complaint.
The result,
very happy.
yeah.
Yeah. And for those that want to do more, obviously she's not hard up, but she does have a book out at Christmas, and it is called The Christmas Pig. Is it called The Christmas Pig? Yes. It's called The Christmas Pig. If you don't want to buy it, go onto her Twitter or her Facebook and drown out the hate that she gets on her feeds, and just post something really nice that you're looking forward to her new book, even if you're not going to buy it. Okay, but the hate on that she gets is just ridiculous. So that's my news. I'm so happy for her. Good for her.
Well, do you know what? Speaking of which, I went on yesterday because I went on the thread because I saw that she'd announced a book, and I was expecting all sorts of, hate. And it was actually full of people being like, fantastic, I'm going to order for all my kids, and it was so nice to see actually the majority of people aren't like hateful sort of misogynists. It's like this small minority of people, and most people are still supporting her, and she's not actually been cancelled.
Exactly.
Just go on Twitter. Yeah.
Do you think
Rowling resistance?
I was going to say, do you think what's happened will make people or organisations think twice before calling her a transphobe and making accusations? And do you think that will trickle down to regular people like us as well? Like, will people think twice before just throwing that around in the future?
Who was it that it's the second time. It's the second time. A radio it was a children's news website had to apologise. So it's the second time. It keeps happening. Every time they have to apologise and be basically told to back off. One day she'll be left alone. One day.
Well, it should be basic journalism. Is that if somebody isn't there to defend themselves and somebody makes an accusation, even if there's quite a lot of evidence for it, the role of a journalist is to even just to say, "I'm sorry, that person isn't here to defend themselves."
That was the day. Yeah.
That was. I think that was
it, wasn't it?
Allowed to stand like one of the guests called her a transphobe, and the host's duty is to sort of make sure that nobody's committed libel, or to at least say that's an opinion. You know, you can't really say that. You know, she's not here. And I think that hopefully, I mean, this is the thing. It shouldn't be allowed to stand anyway, should it? The broadcasters should not be able to publish these things. And people call her transphobe all the time, and I'm sure, like many of you, you say to them, "What did she say? Can you show me what she's written?" And there's never, ever an argument or a piece of evidence that they can put forward so that this person hates trans people.
I might be about to say something a little bit controversial here, but I'm just sick of hearing about J.K. Rowling. And, you know, I'm sorry, Chinzia. I'm really, really pleased. I'm really, really pleased that this complaint was upheld, obviously, and I'd have empathy and sympathy for all the hate that she gets, but I hope that she doesn't have to see it personally. I hope that, you know, some poor lackey does it for her and she doesn't see the death threats and things like that, because it's thoroughly, thoroughly unpleasant. And, you know, I read her essay and I thought it was excellent, but it just feels like she is a woman with such a high profile that it sucks the oxygen out of this issue, and everyone talks about her all the time. You know, the trans rights activists and our side as well a little bit, and I think what she's done is important, but we just hear so much about her, and then all of a sudden it becomes an argument about what she said, whether it was transphobic or not, as opposed to the actual issues that she was talking about. And, or, you know, it becomes, can I ever get my Harry Potter tattoo changed and altered? I feel so weird having it now. And there's never really, it never really clicks for them that maybe that the idea of wanting to change something on their body that they got when they were young and they changed their mind about since, it never really clicks for them that there might be some parallels there. But we're talking about that instead of the issues. So whilst I am pleased the complaint was upheld, and I think people should think twice before saying these things about her. I'm sick of hearing about her. Soz JK, if you're watching. I think I like your work, but I'm sick of hearing about you.
I like using her as an example of how mental it is, what's happening to people like her, because people in my circles and in my life that maybe don't know where they stand with what's going on with me, they think this is a one-off and that it's just happening to me, and that everybody calls me a transphobe because I probably am, and there's probably truth in it. So if you can point to JK and you can show what she wrote, and you can show how many outlets and people all over the world are calling her a transphobe, it really proves the point as to how widespread and how mental and hyperbolic this is. Because I think people just think it's a personal beef when it comes down to women like us, or we must have done something. But that is, on a grand scale, a really good example of how you can say something completely reasonable and be thrown under the bus.
You have raised a good point there, actually, Birdie, and you are right. It's you know, and the people who have read her essay and then saw the reaction, you're right, it is quite a good example. And there are people in my life who have said all these things about her and about how she's a horrible transphobe. And I pointed out to one of them, I said, "Oh, what did you think about the section on domestic violence?" And she goes, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "Well, what did you think about what she said?" And she goes, "Well, I didn't read it." And it's that they don't read it. But you do raise a good point that it is a good example to hold up, because you can see what she's written and you can see the reaction and you can see how the two don't marry up.
I do understand your frustration as well.
I think that part of what makes her so helpful in this discussion is her fame globally, right? So, you know, so I have this childhood friend, and she and I have fought about gender several times. And so my friend lives in Ohio, and she posted a story about a murder that took place in Indianapolis, Indiana. So for anyone who doesn't know, Indianapolis is like in the middle of the state of Indiana, which is in the middle of our country, right?
I've been there before.
So, okay. So this murder took place in Indianapolis. Horrible, 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 right? Like, you know, trans-identified man is murdered. So that's awful. And so my friend posts on Facebook that it's J.K. Rowling's fault that this man was murdered. And so I was able to say to her, look, No matter what you think about gender or gender identity, to blame J.K. Rowling for a murder that took place in Indianapolis, Indiana, is patently absurd. Now, she didn't agree with me, but what it did is it got another mutual friend to be like, wait, what? You know, like this other mutual friend was like, why on earth are we blaming the author of Harry Potter for this murder that took place in Indianapolis? That makes no sense. And so this other friend took it as an opportunity to educate herself because she didn't know what was going on. She had no idea about this issue or what J.K. Rowling had said about it. So for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think that she does have that brand name recognition, and that she is good to start a conversation, and it is a global thing now in many, many countries. J.K. Rowling's kind of like the queen. She's the most successful woman in the United Kingdom, at least. But do you know, I worry though as well. I think the way that she's been treated online is, as well as being like a conversation opener, I worry that it's sort of a lesson for all other women who are thinking about speaking out or saying something, because they can see all the abuse that she receives and they're just like, is it worth it? You know, they can see how well worded, how well crafted the essay was. She's always very careful not to make it about, she doesn't even make it about trans rights as much as women's rights. And yet she's, they've destroyed her. And I think a lot of people just go, you know what? I've not got. Is she a billionaire, or she's practically there? You know, she's got all this status, all this wealth, and yet she's still not protected from the mob. And I think that what they are doing to J.K. Rowling is a very tactical thing. And I don't think it's like there's not somebody out there like up high who's telling everybody to go and make awful things. But I think, because it's such a misogynistic movement at its roots, that there's like it's almost like happening by itself, and it's making a lesson out of her, and it's telling other women to be careful and watch yourself, because this will happen to you, and I'm sure it's happened to all of us, hasn't it? You know, it's not an isolated incident, and for women who don't have the same, I don't know what mentality we've got that makes us stick our necks out in it, but I think most women have got more feet. I don't know. Most people aren't going to rock the boat and put themselves in the firing line. I think that's quite a weird thing.
If they do rock the boat, there's plenty of us that will free them. We will free you from the prisoner of Azkaban. Transcaban. I got it in there. Transcaban.
Yeah.
We will come and get you. We will stand up for you. So there's plenty of us that will stick up for you. And so, positive. And like you said, you read a lot of good messages on her Facebook. So that's really good news. I'm really happy.
It is getting more positive for on the comment sections on everything she posts.
I think a lot of women have woken up, because I noticed I was having a little debate yesterday with people saying she's awful, and it wasn't me versus like 20 people, it was me and 20 people versus one person. There were other people joining in and making points and comments, and I didn't feel like I was so alone. So I think a lot of women have gone away and done some homework and come back, and they're willing to discuss this and put the necks out a little bit more, because I think that once you see what's happening, you can't really unsee it, can you? And
like 5 years ago it was me online versus 20 people, like you said, and now I don't really say much on my personal Facebook or whatever, but now if there's something said, it'll be me or what I've said or what I've done, and then people bitching about it, and then there'll be slowly, every time it happens, more and more people are sticking up for me, or more and more people are sticking up for women, more and more people are saying something, or even if they're just doing it in a questioning way, like sort of saying, oh, but what if this, or what about this, or I'm not sure about that, and it comes in that way. I can see the tide turning.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you found that, Cara,
thank you. I'm going to have to jump off. But thank you so much for having me. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for all that info.
Bye.
See you later, Cara.
Okay, that seems like a good excuse. For Iris, what are you going to talk about this week?
Right. Okay. I was just going to ask the question and then get us to start. I do have some information on it if anybody's not sure, but I wanted to. I don't know if everyone saw that viral tweet. I think it was the weekend or maybe just before, by Openly, where they were listing all the different cultures that are third genders. I think from my research, basically third genders, but they are saying that they're non-binary genders. So, you know, all these different cultures have their own different words for third genders, but according to the new, what they call genderists, they were trans, basically. They were trans.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
So
so
this
is it offensive for them to keep using other cultures to back up their ideology?
is
I find it
online.
offensive.
So
I
is
find
this,
it offensive because they use my culture as well.
yeah, this is the whole like this is the whole line, isn't it? That like the sex binary is white supremacy somehow. That before we went along and colonized these countries, they didn't really know what men and women were, and they needed us to come along and teach them, obviously, because they were too stupid to figure it out themselves. You know, I find this offensive, and
Yep.
and you know, and I know I've spoken to people who are from those cultures who say, you know, this is taking it out of context and putting your own culture within our culture, and you're not really respecting us and understanding our culture in itself has its own like richness, and it makes sense within itself, but not if you just apply your ideology into our culture.
Yeah, I mean, I find it more frustrating because the actual people from their culture, for example, the Native Americans, the Twospirit, they let get away with it. No one really from that culture says anything about it. I mean, there's so many different tribes within Native Americans that it's really insulting the way they use the one Two-Spirit thing to describe the whole culture.
They've done that with all of the examples, though. I saw that because I went on there and I commented on every single one. And I just said, because the way they portrayed it is that it's not just non-binary, but it's proof of an actual third sex. And this is proof that sex is a spectrum. And then it validates our culture of thinking that trans and non-binary is a separate human being that we need to accommodate.
Yeah,
That's the way I read it.
It's the opposite.
Do you think so?
It's the opposite. They're not actually saying it's a third sex, female and whatever. That's what the cultures are saying they are, and that's how I interpret in my culture what this I can't even remember what the word is, the Incan one, but they're saying that they're transgender or non-binary. So they're trying to actually remove the words for each culture by just naming them transgender, non-binary, that sort of thing.
But that's really disrespectful to that culture because you're just colonizing their language, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. You got it.
Why do you think there's a lack of pushback from those cultures themselves, Iris? Do you know, like in your, do you see people saying, no, this is not actually right what you're doing?
I see women pushing back. I've seen a couple of women pushing back and trying to explain how it actually is, that it's not transgender or whatever. It's actually a separate classification for people outside, you know. Well, from what I can tell, I have researched nearly all of the cultures, and from what I can tell, it's basically a separate category for homosexuality.
I read that.
Because don't forget, that isn't the language, the Western language for homosexuality. They have their own language, which most likely falls under these third sex categories that they have.
Well,
that's something I wanted to ask, Iris. Kind of, so a lot of these, so as you say, for example, to use the Two-Spirit thing for Native Americans, not all tribes have Two-Spirit, that concept. It's specific to only some tribes, isn't it? And I wanted to ask if in your research you had come across, so am I right in thinking that a lot of these cultures that have these third gender or Two-Spirit or whatever tend to be the ones that have very, very strict gender-based roles in the first place, and that the only way for a woman or a man to kind of transcend their gender role is to identify as this third gender?
I think so, and it's always male-based. I think so, yeah, because it's male-based, isn't it? So it's a way to explain the difference. That person, yes, I think you've got it. And there is one where they are allowed to express their homosexuality by dressing the way they do and acting the way they do, but they're still expected to fulfill their heterosexual roles. I get married to a woman, have children. Yeah, but I think you got it. I mean, it's so, there's so much. I mean, I could only do just a basic search, but there's so much into all of them, and going back to, you know, a long time. The Indian, what are they called? The
Hijra.
What are they called? Hijra. Oh
So
my goodness, yes.
Yeah.
Again, that's not just one. That's not just India. There's different names for different areas, different regions, and they all, again, fulfill different roles. The main one being the originally called the eunuchs. They were eunuchs, the original ones. And then there were the prostituted ones, basically young boys that were, you know, dressed as females to be used by other men.
Well, this is an interesting thing. It's you know, it's not even necessarily homosexual males. Like, I think the Hijra is like a prostitute class of lower class Indians, maybe boys taken from the slums, and it's not this. There's a very much romanticized picture of what is occurring in these cultures, and you know, the Hijra are not like some priest class as it may be made out in like the two-spirit cultures. They're actually quite you know, there's a lot of things happening at the same time. And one thing that I find really interesting, left out of the debate, is that often these third genders, women aren't allowed to identify out of their sex class because they're too much of a precious resource. If you're a lesbian, that's it. If you're a lesbian, you're stuck. You've got to stop that. Do you know what I mean? And
I read about one where there's I can't remember what country it was, but the women are allowed to they become promoted to men if they take a vow of chastity for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. That was the only one, Birdie. I couldn't find any other female ones. That was the only one. All the rest were based. They were all men.
Apart from the Toms, there were Toms. Is it in Thailand? There's Toms, and they're basically lesbian women who identify as men or something or other. I can't remember what it was, but they are allowed to claim that they're not women so that they can go out with other women.
Well, I guess in Iran as well, I think in Iran that homosexuality is a crime, but if you agree to transition, then they will basically just leave you alone. And a lot of lesbian women are being forced onto testosterone, and you know, I think that it's shocking that nobody's asking these questions about what actually occurs with their gender. It's about sexism and homophobia and maintaining the sex binaries and the gender castes. Because if you are a man who is effeminate, you're not really a man, are you? You're like a woman, but you're not a woman. You know, we don't really want you around with women, but you can just kind of go off over there and do your own thing. And I mean,
stay-at-home mum being a stay-at-home mum, all I had was Wikipedia. I found a couple of declarations as well, but they were by white people. They were by white groups saying that we reject the two-spirit, we should leave this alone. So I found a couple of declarations. I went onto Wikipedia, and there's 500 surviving Native American cultures, and it said with diverse attitudes to two spirits. Some they say are blessed with the spirit of man and women together, some it's separate, and I just thought our Western lack of knowledge is contributing to the diluting of Indigenous cultures. That's what we're doing. We're diluting.
Exactly. Yes.
Again, Western culture getting our grubby hands. We're always on the thief. I'm so sorry. We're so sorry. We're always on the thief, aren't we? Or, diluting or just saying, oh, no, that's not what you thought. That's not what you think. That's not that's not the ideas. And we're going to change it. And I think it's so insulting. It's so insulting.
Did you come across in that Wikipedia about the fact that it could possibly have been a Western person that came up with the two native name?
Yes,
you did.
Yes,
yeah,
that's amazing.
I came across the Indigenous cultures. Our ideas implanted on. And we've taken it
because they didn't. Yeah, they didn't want to use the Western name of homosexuality, gay, lesbian. So they all settled on that one two-spirit tag, and
I found that's really interesting as well. That some of the tribes, it's actually both spirits inside you, and some it's not. So you cannot say two-spirit. Which tribe? Which tribe are you talking about then?
Yeah, exactly.
You think a lot of this? You think a lot of this is like I want to call it like the Elizabeth Warren effect. I don't like the senator in America who said that she was like an Indian when she's like 1/16th Indian or something ridiculous. I see it quite a lot in Canada with people who I'm from such and such tribe, and I'm not being funny, but I'm like, you look kind of white, and I'm not sure how much of whether or not you've just done a DNA test and found some native DNA, or you've got a great grandfather. How much of a part of that community are you? And are you just? I think you're just using it and using this genealogy to sort of just do what you like, and just sort of misunderstand and misappropriate an ancestor.
People are using that as part of their identity to weigh in and have power in situations, in social situations as well. And I think a lot of people will do that because, first of all, they feel guilty for being white, and secondly, they think that they can boss people around if they say that they're not white somehow.
Yeah, I've noticed this. I was at a march recently and somebody said we've got to help BIPOC, which stands for, I think it just stands for Black, Indigenous, Person of Colour. And I just thought, I'm not being
non-whites then. Non-whites. Everyone who's not white.
There's not many Indigenous people in the United Kingdom. I'm not being funny. There might be, but really, that's something that applies to Australia or America, or it's just an imported identity politics title that doesn't really mean anything in the United Kingdom, and it just made me cringe. I was just like, just don't say that.
Another thing is some of these reserves in America, they're rich as aces. They don't need our pity. They've got casinos, and so there's also that pitying, that white pitying, and you just think, hang on a minute, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are doing perfectly well, thank you, without us. And how could you, Canada, the Indigenous young women that are murdered, why do you want a piece of that? Why do you want to? Because it's just so insulting. They're ignored. They're left on the side of the road dead. Every month in Canada. We're in white people going into that territory. Taking that. I've got no time for it. No time for it at all.
Yeah. Well, Naomi. Sorry, that was a really smooth transition there, wasn't it?
Wake up!
I'm going to talk about. So there was a tweet from Dr. Jess Taylor about the risk of blood clots related to the vaccine rollout that's happening at the moment. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Share screen. Okay. Yes, share. Okay, can you see what I'm seeing now?
No.
Oh,
yeah.
Want something? Yep, got it.
Yeah.
So so this is Dr. Taylor's tweet. I'm going to read it out as well for some people who might just be listening and not watching. It's at Dr. Jess Taylor. For those who don't know who she is a feminist psychologist. She talks a lot about violence against women and does a lot of work on victim blaming culture. And she says, I have zero time for people claiming that young, healthy women dying from blood clots is just this tiny risk no one should pay any attention to. 11 years ago, I was put on medication that was being investigated for a, quote, tiny risk of blood clots and had a stroke. I was 19. So I wanted to talk a little bit about women's health and, yeah, this risk of blood clots. So it's been in the news that with the AstraZeneca vaccine and potentially with the Johnson & Johnson one as well, there's been a lot of controversy about this risk of blood clots. Some European countries have decided to suspend administering the jab, or they've revised the protocols, what age group they're going to give it to. And if you actually look at the hard data, the risk of blood clot is quite small overall. It is quite small. However, it is still a risk. With any and every medical intervention, there is a risk. Even ones that are great, and lots of medical interventions are really fantastic, but every medical intervention carries a risk. If you look at the risk of COVID, either being hospitalized or dying as well, we have a very age stratified risk, which means that the older you are, the more likely you are, sadly, to die. When we get to young people, especially young women under 30, if you look at the data that we do have, then the risk of the blood clot just edges out the risk of you being hospitalized from COVID if you are young female under 30 and healthy. And so I suppose I wanted to throw it out to the group as well. So the idea is that you take these vaccines when you're offered because it's for the good of the community, because you might not be at risk of COVID, but there are some other people that are at risk. Now, I do believe that we have a duty to other people in our society. However, where does that duty stop? Does it stop when your own health is more compromised? And is it something that women, we often put other people before ourselves, we're socialized in that way? Is that something that we're seeing here as well, especially given that women are slightly more likely to get the blood, be at risk of blood clots, but men are slightly more likely to die in every age group, actually. Men are slightly more likely to die, or happy to be corrected, I think it's every age group, slightly more likely to die from COVID than women are. And I wanted to throw that out to the group. Where does our duty to others stop? Does it stop when, you know, we become isolated? Does it stop when we lose money through the lockdowns? Does it stop when we lose our jobs? Does it stop when we lose our whole business? Does it stop when we lose the roof over our heads? Does it stop when our health becomes compromised? Does it stop when we die? Do you think that women may be slightly more pressured to give up more for other people?
I think most definitely. Even if you look at things like the jobs that are requiring vaccines, that might be going forward with requiring vaccine certification, they're like nursing roles, caring roles, maybe even things like, I think we're going forward, it'll be things like the teaching profession. And although it isn't perceived maybe to many people as a sex or like gender issue, that it is, because we're asking, this burden is falling on women, when, like you're saying, maybe they're not actually themselves at greater risk, and this intervention itself is more risky for them than non-intervention. And I don't see those discussions being had, which I think would be really interesting to have, is linking up the occupational risks with the gender divide, because I think, like you say, this is going to fall on women. And also, we are just socialised that we put other people first. Like, a female socialisation kicks in, and we go like, "Oh yeah, no, I'll you know."
I read
sorry.
I read a Rolling Stone piece. It's a brand new piece, and hang on a minute. So it's Tessa Stewart. She does an interview in Rolling Stone with Dr. Sabra Klein. Dr. Sabra Klein, she's America, so this is America, but they didn't ask the women, the researchers doing the COVID vaccines, didn't ask the women about their periods. Didn't bother, just didn't. Yeah. So they think, they said, they reckon that vaccines do make an impact on our periods, hormones, or our hormones and periods can make an impact on the vaccine and COVID, on a virus. So how are we supposed to have faith in this vaccine if they didn't ask the baby how we function? They seem to know what we are, but not how we function, and that's how we meant to say, yeah, we'll take the vaccine. They didn't ask the most important questions. So we're supposed to have, I have zero faith now, but again, like you said, the pressure on society that we've got to look after, we've got to mother society, and that's our job, and not to worry that they didn't ask the most important questions in these studies.
The other thing I don't like about it is the coercive nature of trying to get people to take the vaccine. So I saw that McDonald's are giving their employees a whole £30 for 4 hours wages if they get the jab, and I just think that's quite concerning to me, that is going to be aimed at people that potentially need that extra 30 quid, but would maybe not make the right decision for themselves, because they need to look up on what's right for them. And I'm not against taking the vaccine personally. I think because of my own health conditions, my own health concerns, but it does concern me about the blood clots and about not testing this on women in an authentic way that requires, if you know it's going to muck up their period, then you need to check out what's going on with that. I don't like that we're taking the risk.
You've a risk of blood clot. It's scary stuff.
It's scary stuff. It's really concerning, really concerning, because I have quite a few people in my family have had blood clots, so I'm very concerned about that and the fact that this isn't being looked into properly. And Jess, on her Twitter, she was really ferocious about repeatedly hammering in the question, because people were saying, oh, but older women are not getting the blood clots, and she was saying, okay, but why are the younger women getting it? Why is that? Why don't we know why this is happening? And it was really good to see that interaction, the way she just kept sticking to the point and hammering it in.
Good for her.
You've raised something really interesting there, because it does so quickly and so often get pulled off point. It's really difficult to have an open and honest conversation about genuine concerns about this, because you get all sorts of epithets hurled at you, and just asking a simple question like, why are we seeing blood clots in young women? Just even asking that question, you get accused of being an anti-vaxxer, of spreading dangerous disinformation and things like that. But we should be asking these questions. Katie also raised a really interesting point about the kind of professions that we see that tend to be more female dominated and that kind of being pushed to get the jab. And I just wanted to draw some parallels with the swine flu vaccine debacle as well. Now, I've had vaccines, and I think vaccines are a miracle of modern medicine. However, we can't ignore that this vaccine we only have a few months' data at best, and you might decide that it is right for you when you weigh up your own circumstances. Fine, you should be supported to get the jab, definitely. But let's draw some parallels to the swine flu vaccine debacle. So a lot of NHS workers, and the NHS is staffed by more women than men, were pressured to get this pandemrix, or sometimes not really told that it was a newer vaccine. It was just in all the kind of shots that they get. A lot of NHS workers get the flu jab every year, and it caused narcolepsy in some people, and there's been an ongoing lawsuit I think some of it was only settled last year as well. Happy to be corrected, but it was pandemics and it was manufactured by GlaxoSmithKline, and it affected a lot of NHS workers who were pressured, coerced into taking the swine flu vaccine. Now, history doesn't always repeat, but it often rhymes or something like that. But I don't know, we should be able to have these questions and not be shut down by them. And I think if people do decide that the risk of taking a vaccine that is still in its phase 3 clinical trials, if those risks outweigh the other risks, then they should be allowed to say no, and they shouldn't be shamed for it. That should be a decision they're allowed to make. And vice versa, anyone who decides that on balance, taking the jab is the right decision for them should be supported as well.
So just to quote here, just Google this, 77% of NHS staff are female.
Right, 76, yeah, there we go.
You know, I think going back to the point that you made, Chinzia, about the fact they didn't ask them about their periods. I think we see this again and again and again, is that the male body is seen as the default and the female is like some weird extra add-on. And for many years, they didn't even use this in clinical trials because our hormones interrupted like the trials. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. He's saying that you're just going to test this and have no idea what the impact will be on women because we interfere too much. Well, surely, A, that's telling you something really interesting about the medication and how it's working, maybe that you don't understand why it's doing things. And B, like, we're like 52% of the world. Like, you know, how dare you basically just treat us like a bit of a weird anomaly.
And then shamed for saying, you know, hang on a minute, there's a problem. Then you're shamed.
Yeah, I got called an anti-vaxxer on Twitter just for saying that I think people should be able to make their own decisions whether they take this or not and not be coerced.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the coercion that go on.
And that's, sorry, I was going to say, and nobody even stopped to ask me if I want the vaccine. Of course I want it because I've got health concerns. But nobody even stopped to ask me before calling me an anti-vaxxer. It's just as toxic as the other debate we're chatting about, you know?
Well, you know, Cara was saying some really interesting stuff earlier, and I've seen so many parallels, the kind of the hashtag no debate, the hysteria and the emotional manipulation, especially if you're in a group that is at slightly higher risk of adverse effects from the vaccine than COVID, people saying, but do you just want grandma to die? It's the exact same rhetoric that we see. Yeah, it's the same kind of hyperbolic emotional manipulation that we see.
It's the same, like, you don't think COVID exists, you don't think trans people exist. It's like, I can think that something is existing without thinking it exists in the way that you think it is, or just question, or just think, hang on a minute, what's going on? I mean, follow the science. Science isn't a religion. If you think science is like a thing that has the truth that everybody agrees on, or these like boffins in white coats just like purely seeking the scientific truth, it's like you don't really understand how science works and how it's corrupted by money. And there's a lot of money to be made in the pharmaceutical industry, and a lot of pressure on them. You know, not even from the money men, but now people have invested so much personally in this vaccine that I worry, you know, when people start talking about the blood clots, that's seen as anti-vax, and it's like, well, actually, no. If you've had a blood clot yourself, you're not going to feel. If you're scared to come forward and say I've got some symptoms, in case people call you like a tinfoil hatter or something, when you're actually just a person who has, you know.
Well, you're right to bring. So I was going to say, you're right to bring up the money, because the World Health Organization was investigated for the swine flu debacle. The European Parliament investigated it, and the UK spent over £500 million on this Tamiflu drug that it didn't really use. And it was a lot of the same names that are coming up today as well. So they spent all this money. The World Health Organization was investigated by the European Parliament because a lot of the people who were advisors on the WHO also had links to some of the pharmaceutical companies. Yet they were investigated by it. This isn't, you know, it's not. And a lot of people who have a lot of people on the left who have criticisms of capitalism, criticism of the pharmaceutical industry. Again, in like the other debate as well, we all have criticisms of the pharmaceutical industry, just seem to be completely blind to this. And again, dismiss it. It's obviously there's a nasty pathogen going around. Obviously, it's sadly affecting those people who are at risk. We should obviously take sensible, sustainable measures to minimize that risk. And it's just impossible to have a conversation about it. And you tell people that, well, the World Health Organization were investigated over the swine flu debacle, and it just does not compute.
There are women on Twitter saying that their periods have been affected by the vaccine, that their periods are all over the place. That has not been investigated. They haven't even bothered, no research done into it. I, at the beginning, not a shamer, but certainly like, yeah, vaccine, give me it. This is brilliant. I wouldn't have shamed anyone, but I was so positive and optimistic. And now, after reading what I've been reading, I'm definitely thinking, maybe I'm not so optimistic. Maybe I'll get a blood clot. Will it affect my periods? There's a lot of questions and, nuances that weren't there before. And it's definitely opened my eyes. Definitely. So well done, Naomi, for bringing it up. Because I wouldn't have known.
Thank you.
I wouldn't have known. But like, give me the vaccine. Give me it. Not now.
Yeah. It's funny, but I'm wondering how long the video might stay up if we're going to get zucked for spreading the false information.
I think it's a worse third rail than the trans stuff now, Well, I don't know I don't know, but I think that anything about the COVID pandemic is worse than the trans stuff. Any questioning the narrative.
I wonder if the fact that this topic is actually worse than the women's rights and trans issue, it might be contributing to people feeling braver about sticking up for women.
That's a really good point.
I had not thought about that, but I think maybe maybe red pilling you to certain things that are occurring in certain behaviours, maybe with online mobbing and lack of tolerance for different opinions. And I think that there's a space there to sort of segue into this. If people are seeing one thing that's concerning them, then they might be more open to having a discussion about something else and realising maybe these people are not the evil bigots that I was being conditioned to see them as. So.
Well, in another parallel, I was looking at the rap sheet of all the pharmaceutical companies that have got vaccines on the market, and Pfizer, as of November 2020, there were 7,800 testosterone therapy lawsuits against them because, that people getting blood clots, heart problems and things like that, patients who were taking their testosterone therapy. I don't know if these were all female patients or if it was sometimes men have testosterone therapy for various conditions as well. The information I found didn't specify the sex, but there's 7,800 lawsuits against Pfizer. Just on testosterone therapy.
The testosterone issue really pisses me off because I've got PCOS, so my testosterone levels are just slightly higher than they should be. And when I got diagnosed with PCOS and the doctor told me that, the first thing they told me was the risk of diabetes, heart attack, stroke, osteoporosis, all these really serious things that can happen to your health. And then you've got all these people out there saying it's okay to give a teenager testosterone for like 20 years of her life. And it pisses me off. I read in Abigail Schreier's book that I think it was, I might be wrong here, but I'm sure people will correct me. I think it's something along the lines of 40 times the amount of the average man's testosterone is what we're giving kids. And it's astronomical. It was a ridiculous number.
Toxic. I know that it's toxic, and you're not supposed to get it on your clothes.
You're poisoning yourself.
Separately, so it's a very toxic. All of the hormones are very toxic. I thought the trans
you don't
issue.
actually...
Sorry, Iris.
I was just going to say quickly that you don't actually hear about the side effects, the seriousness of them, until they are detransitioned and they're honest and come out about it. Otherwise, the ones that are still within the cult, they don't tell people about these things they're going through.
And I'm not even convinced that this will help them mentally, because I read, this could be bogus, but I read it somewhere that with PCOS, a lot of women are having sort of like psychosis-like symptoms before their period because of the hormonal flushes and the changes and everything. And so I'm not even convinced that this helps young people mentally.
Well,
the vaginal atrophy and constantly being in pain, scratching. It's a constant reminder that you have a vagina. I think it was the Times did the detransitioners, and a young woman said that it was just a constant reminder. It ate away at her mental health, and it just wasn't worth it. But I thought, to be honest, when the COVID happened, our newspapers were filled with more men die than women. Not what we're discussing, the female issues. It was definitely all over the papers. The New Scientist, and they're still going with that. And that was due to sex differences in our immune system, genetics. So I thought, oh well, but the trans lobby will stop saying such ridiculous things now, and they haven't. And it's right there in the New Scientist. We can just pull the news. There you go. There's men and women are different. There you go. The COVID has done that. I don't understand why they're still banging the drum for that.
Yeah. Well, it's not like the virus passes over you and goes, oh, but he's wearing women's shoes.
Well, you know what? Do you know what I find shocking actually? It's the government. Government decided not to record sex when it was looking at other COVID statistics. It decided that sex was not an important point, but actually that's absolutely insanely ridiculous, especially considering what we had coming out of China, which seems to heavily suggest this has a sex differentiation. And actually I did find do you know what, trans women on women's hormones actually had a lower risk than men, because they think it might be something to do with the estrogen or progesterone, or maybe some of the drugs that were given to them. So
is that a definite? I'm going to look that up because is that?
I think I did read that estrogen is more reactive to your T cells or something like that. Yeah.
So, but I mean, it's shocking to me that the government decided not to record sex. I can only think that is due to the influence of this lobby that treats sex like a dirty word, which is, it's putting women at risk, and it's putting men at risk actually, which is quite interesting to me. Yeah. This is something that for once not recording it or not understanding what is happening is bad for men, and we're not understanding why it is that men might be at more risk of dying than women. And I guess it is what it is, I suppose.
Is it Birdie left? Is it you now?
What are you talking about?
What's up?
It's you.
Oh, it's my turn. Oh, shit. I was going to talk about Robert Webb, when so he had an interview about his new show on TV. Is it called Back? I think it's called Back. I think I've watched an episode of it as well. It's quite good. But the interview was supposed to be about that, and then the interviewer ambushed him with a question about the interviewer's got a child that is trans, and ambushed Robert Webb with a question about it. And Robert Webb sort of felt uncomfortable, and the way I read it was that he sort of answered it but didn't. And then everything online today has been basically saying that he's there's weirdly two stories. There's one saying he's been caught out, and there's one saying that he's backtracking, but he's not done either. And I know last year he said that mermaids are rubbish. He said something about mermaids, and then he didn't say anything else. So I was thinking that maybe he is trying to avoid the shit that comes with speaking up about this, but also feels a certain way about it.
He more or less said that. He said he didn't want the backlash. He couldn't remember exactly what he said, because, like you said, he was ambushed. It's not like they said, oh, we're going to ask you about this. Can you check what it was you said? He couldn't remember everything about it. And he didn't want to speak about the rest of it because he didn't really understand it. So,
I thought he was really good at being very clear that his criticisms were with the way the charity had conducted itself. And they were, and he repeated that as well. But the interviewer, Jessie Thorne, seemed to really, it's like he wanted to catch Robert out. He wanted Robert to go, well, now, Jessie, that you've asked, I do actually hate all trans kids. When it's just idiotic.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, the criticisms were specific to the way that Mermaids, a charity, has conducted itself. And I thought you drew a really good parallel with Oxfam as well. I've got loads of criticisms of Oxfam, as I imagine most of us here do. It doesn't mean that I hate people in the developing countries. And he said the same as well. But I thought he was very clear. But it's been interesting to watch the fallout.
Yeah, I think he done well to not lose his shit, really, because I think I'm, like, me personally, I'm in a position where if somebody said that to me, something along the lines of, oh, do you believe in trans kids or whatever, I'd just say, don't be so stupid. I would never put children on drugs just because they're having feelings or whatever, you know. And he done really well to maintain his composure and to, on the spot, come up with an answer that's referencing what he previously said and stick to it rather than get derailed into a conversation about whether you think people exist or not.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well, because the interviewer himself has a trans kid, and I think this kid came out at 3 years old. And at 3 years old, I came out as a boy. I was like, I don't want to be a girl. For like a lot of my childhood, you know, I think I even had a name. I was called myself Colin. Do you know what I mean? And thankfully, my mother didn't take me to a doctor and put me on, you know, hormones. But it's like these parents are held up as these paragons of virtue. And to me, I don't know. Well, I don't know the situation here, but I feel like they've made a decision and they're trying to maintain the decision with hormones and justify their decision that they've made as a parent. Like Susie Green, was it the chairwoman of Mermaids?
Yeah, she's the CEO of Mermaids. Yeah, she took her son to be to Thailand for sex reassignment surgery when he was like 16 years old, and now, you know,
15. But the surgery actually took place on the day he turned 16, so it was timed really well.
Yeah, and the Thai government don't do that anymore, do they? They raise the barrier, the age barrier.
She did that because her husband didn't like her son playing with girls' toys. That really wound me up because that don't mean fuck all.
Yeah.
But, do you know what I mean? It sounds really homophobic, the whole story.
It does. Poor baby.
Yeah, when I was listening to the interview, when I was listening to the web interview, when the presenter actually said, my kindergarten child, I had to pause and say, what? I had to rewind just to make sure I heard correctly, because to me that was the most shocking part, that they saying that such a young child was identifying as trans. My goodness, I think that's the most shocking part, never mind everything else.
But that's the sort of age that you don't let your kid pick what they're going to wear that day, and then you're going to let them pick their fucking identity. It's ridiculous.
My 3-year-old couldn't speak. She barely spoke, you know, she couldn't pronounce her words properly.
I was like that.
I know, you shouldn't be doing that to children.
I think that it's kind of, to be honest, I think it's the height of cruelty when they tell children that you can change sex as well. They, like, when you're a child, you don't understand reality, and if somebody tells you when you grow up you can change sex, you'll believe them. You don't understand that what a transition actually involves, and that you can't actually change sex. You can take drugs to modify your body, be a lifelong patient, and it have all of these health risks. And to me, it's just cruel. It's cruel to tell a child that, because if somebody would have told me that when I was a child, I would have been like, yeah, I'm doing that, you know. And you really need an adult to come in and be like, you know, you're too young to make that decision. And, you know, just to explain, it's okay to play with boys. There's no such thing as boys' toys and girls' toys. These are just your toys, you know.
Exactly.
You're fine as you are. Unfortunately, my mother was good at raising me up and allowing me to be myself have my hair how I wanted, play with who I wanted, with the toys I wanted. My mum was like, I thought when you grew up, you grow up to be a lesbian, but I was totally happy with that. And I think that's another thing that people aren't talking about is like a homophobia, where people are uncomfortable.
Me and you, I'm in my 40s, and I remember, so I'm 79, and our toys were primary colours. There was just we didn't have that mass produced yet. We didn't have, Toys R Us. And it was I read it somewhere that it was the ideas of feminists, the toy makers had brought in the ideas of feminists. What you're saying, there's no boys or girls, let's just make them bright and colourful. So mine and my brother's toys were really primary colours. There was no pink and blue. And that came in my younger brothers and sisters. There's 10 years difference. So 10 years later, that had all gone. And what a shame, because I really do think that that's helped even parents, stupid parents, into believing into this utter nonsense.
I grew up with all of that.
Capitalism has helped them, brainwash them into believing that a toy has a sex.
My parents were like quite strict on that actually, because I was the only girl, so my parents wanted me to be really girly, and I remember that made things worse because all I wanted was to play with my brother's cars and train set. And if I'd have been allowed that openly, I think I wouldn't have made such a big deal out of it in my head. Do you know what I mean? So I do sympathise with kids that are feeling that way, and that it makes me angry that the parents won't just, like you said, let them have their toys. It's not a big deal, really, at the end of the day.
They've been brainwashed by society. I think the parents, like you were saying, it's child abuse. So, yes, I do think that like society has brainwashed adults into believing this utter guff. It's guff.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that my parents thought that they were doing anything to me by telling me that you're a girl, you can't play with these toys. They didn't think that that was going to be an issue. They thought they just thought, why don't you like these dolls? We've got you all the dolls. Look at them.
Brainwashed.
Brainwashed. But the other side of it happened as well. So the other side of it happened as well. So my brothers used to have fist fights over who gets to play with my Barbies and Polly Pockets next, and nobody ever told them they can't do that.
Yeah. Oh.
It was weird, but maybe that's just my household. I don't know about anyone else.
I think you're normal. I think that's a normal behaviour, actually, Birdie. I don't think that's unusual. I've met too many that, where I've cut my own family just think it's nuts that, what I'm saying. They don't believe it. No, girls have long hair, and girls, they're not rough and tumble. They don't do that. So it's normal. It's a society brainwashing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think Robert Webb's I don't think anyone's asking him to suck their dick on Twitter, do you?
No! Even Owen Jones wrote a little thing about him, didn't he? And someone said, go on, tag him in. And Owen Jones said, no, I can't be bothered.
Oh,
no, the way Owen Jones portrayed it really badly. He said something along the lines of how trans people are being misrepresented, and that we need to remember they're like an oppressed, marginalised group, and all of this. And I just hate the way that it's being repeated over and over again, that these people, this vulnerable group of people, are being misrepresented by these big, monstrous women that are just being nasty.
Oh God, I know. It is. I think that's their job, isn't it? I think they have a new buzzword or new phrase every week or so, and then they just start bombarding the internet with it. Yeah.
The trans rights activists here say the same thing, that they're marginalised, oppressed. Yet they're on tap with the MP. They can just call our MP. Yeah. But we have 88 FGM survivors in Portsmouth. That was reported 2018. 88 FGM survivors, and I don't think they've got the MP on tap. That they haven't. No. They haven't, and so it doesn't add up that they're the most marginalised, oppressed, when it's not true. It's not true. Or they're crowdfunders, and they make thousands. And the FGM survivors, I think they earned about £300. The university did a little fundraiser. It was about £300. But our trans rights activists, they can make thousands for their top surgery, the crowdfunders. You know, it's less than 3 months. And I just think, really? That's not saying to me that you're oppressed or you know, marginalised at all. Because we're white as well, you know, a lot of white people. But it's not happening.
Not middle class.
Yeah.
Not what I've seen.
Yeah, we can't call the police, can we, and get them to go and knock on the doors of people who said nasty things about us on the internet. It's one way. I've not seen a single, well, not to my knowledge, have I seen a case of a police force going investigating you know, the likes of Owen Jones or you know, people who say outrageous things about us, and we just go, you know, lesbians are the new hate group. Apparently they're not oppressed anymore. They're evil gatekeepers.
Mums are the worst ones, aren't they? I've heard about that. Mums on Mumsnet all ganging up. Yeah, mums on the street, mums in the shops, mums in the clubs, mums everywhere.
Bloody mums.
The mothers are coming.
Those hateful, angry, raging mums out on the streets with their buggies and their shopping.
Foaming at the
Gonna
mouth.
batter ya.
Like the things I've read.
Well, I mean, well, that's the thing with mums. It's when you piss off the mums enough, they will react. And I think what you're seeing is the battle of the mums, and a lot of this. Why is Mumsnet the centre of all this? It's because we don't just sit around. Well, I'm not saying we. I'm not a mother, but we don't just sit around talking about knitting and crochet patterns and how to get milk out of your cardigans. You know what I mean? It's like women are the guardians of children and. Actually, the vulnerable and the oppressed. That's why we have those
laws. Everything we've spoken about tonight would be something that women that are mums would already know. They're already concerned about everything, because I imagine when you have a child, you're suddenly concerned about medical, politics, education, healthcare, everything. Everything is something that comes into your life. So that's why I think mums are particularly ferocious and hateful about this.
Well, when you see a group, you know, that your daughter's friend group, all trans, all have a pronoun, all have a gender identity, and I went to an all-girls school, that didn't happen. There's something wrong. You can't. That didn't happen when we were at the same school. I was at the same school, and that wasn't the case. So I just refuse to believe that that we found the kids have found the confidence to finally come out, because I had lesbian friends at school. That we had. It's not as if we were so backwards that and repressed. It's not the case at all. So, like I said, I'm always asking my oldest, you hiding them pronouns from me? You're not chasing them up here.
We've been doing them pronouns.
All of her friends have. So.
I find it. I feel really uncomfortable about looking at kids to tell us how the world is. I feel it really uncomfortable with looking up to kids to tell us what being a woman is, or to tell us what being a man is, or to tell us how things should be structured in our society. I just think something's wrong when we're looking at kids for answers.
Yeah.
Jamila Jamil, the influencer.
Oh, she was fucking brilliant, wasn't she?
She reminds me, it's the playground myth. It's playground myths. She's 35 years old. I read it and I thought she may as well start telling people that you can use condoms, the crisp packets of condoms. You remember that playground myth? She hasn't progressed. That's why we don't want to listen to kids, because they come out of utter rubbish and still say that stuff at school. They still say it.
Oh my god! She's just laugh at her. I honestly just
She's
laugh
like,
at her.
yeah, she's like the girl at school that talks shit. I remember one on the bus on the way home once. I remember overhearing her saying, "Oi, do you know how to get rid of crabs, right? You spray deodorant in your knickers." She's that girl. She's that girl.
Playground myths. Yeah, that's why we don't listen to kids or, you know, Mila. Mila. What do love? What's she on?
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up now. I think we've all had our 5 minutes of infamy. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. There's a little like button in the corner. Please like it, comment, share. Helps us to get the word out. Helps us to spread the message and build a movement, build a platform, and fight back. Basically, make a bit more noise. So, thank you all for coming. You've been fabulous.
Thank you.
It's been nice. It's been great.
Lovely to
Bye,
see
guys.
you. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.